Commander Veldar clicked his claws against the metal table as he stared at the datapad in front of him. The information made no sense. These new creatures called humans were supposed to be warriors? He looked at the physical measurements again and shook his head. The humans were small, much smaller than his own people. The mighty Zephyrians who stood nearly 3 meters tall, with thick armored skin. They were weaker than the rock-eating granite folk who could crush steel with their bare hands. They had no natural weapons like the blade dancers with their razor-sharp arm spikes. They could not breathe poison gas like the shadow dwellers or see in complete darkness like the night stalkers. What exactly are we supposed to do with these creatures? Veldar muttered to his second-in-command, Captain Mordak. Mordak's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. The High Command says they fight well. Their planet recently joined our alliance against the Blood Reapers. Veldar snorted. The Blood Reapers were the most feared enemy in the galaxy. They had conquered 17 star systems in the past year alone. Their warriors stood 4 meters tall, had skin harder than battle armor, and could tear through solid metal with their teeth. The idea that these soft little humans could fight such monsters seemed like a joke. A soft knock came at the door. Enter. Veldar called out. 3 humans walked into the room. Veldar tried not to laugh. The first was a female who barely reached his chest. She had dark hair tied back and wore the same standard uniform as everyone else, but it looked almost comical on her small frame. Behind her came 2 males, both equally unimpressive. Sergeant Kim Dalei reporting for duty, sir, the female said. Her voice was calm and steady, but Veldar noticed she did not look directly at him. Most species either stared in challenge or cowered in fear when meeting a Zephyrian commander. These humans did neither. I am Private Kong Ho Jin, sir, said the first male. He was thin and looked like he had never lifted anything heavier than a data pad. Private Lee Min Soo, sir, added the second. This one was slightly larger, but still looked fragile enough to break if someone sneezed too hard. Veldar studied them for a long moment. Their skin looked soft and easily damaged. Their eyes were small and could probably see very little in low light. They had no claws, no fangs, no spikes or armor plating. Even their bones looked thin through their pale skin. Your species profile indicates you require special atmosphere mixtures to breathe properly, Veldar said, reading from his datapad. You cannot survive in extreme temperatures. You need regular food intake or you become weak. You require sleep every day, or your performance drops significantly. Yes, sir, that is correct, Sergeant Kim replied without any emotion. Veldar set down the pad and walked around the 3 humans. They stood perfectly still, but he noticed their eyes following his movement. There was something about the way they watched him that seemed different from other species, though he could not identify what it was. Your strength ratings are below average for galactic standards, he continued. Your speed is mediocre. Your natural defenses are practically non-existent. Tell me, Sergeant Kim, what exactly can your people contribute to this war effort? Kim's lips curved slightly upward. It was not quite a smile, but something close to it. We follow orders, sir. We complete missions. We protect our allies. How touching, Veldar said dryly. Unfortunately, good intentions will not stop a Blood Reaper from tearing your head off. No, sir, they will not, Kim agreed, but we have other methods. Veldar raised one scaled eyebrow, such as, we adapt, sir. The answer was simple, but something in the way she said it made Veldar pause. There was a quiet confidence in her voice that did not match her fragile appearance. Captain Mordak stepped forward. Commander, perhaps we should assign them to supply duties. Keep them safely behind the lines where they can be useful without getting killed. Veldar nodded. It made sense. These creatures were clearly too weak for real combat, but they seemed intelligent enough to handle logistics and communications. Very well. You'll be assigned to rear support operations, food distribution, equipment maintenance, message relay. Stay out of combat zones. Understood, sir, Kim replied. As the humans turned to leave, Veldar called out, One more thing, Sergeant. Your people are new to galactic warfare. The Blood Reapers are not like whatever enemies you face on your home world. They are bigger, stronger, and more vicious than anything your species has ever encountered. Do not try to be heroes. Kim paused at the doorway and looked back at him. For just a moment, something flickered in her dark eyes. It was gone so quickly that Veldar almost thought he had imagined it. "We understand what we are fighting, sir," she said quietly. "The question is whether they understand what they are fighting." Then she was gone, leaving Veldar staring at an empty doorway and wondering why those words made him feel so uneasy. The alarm screamed to the communications center as red lights flashed across every surface. Veldar grabbed his weapon and rushed toward the main display screen, where Captain Mordak was already studying the incoming reports. "Blood Reapers, sir," Mordak said, his 4 eyes wide with concern. 3 assault ships just dropped out of hyperspace. They are heading straight for the mining colony on the surface. Veldar cursed in his native language. The mining colony had 800 workers from 12 different species. Most of them were civilians with no combat training. His garrison only had 200 soldiers, and half of them were currently off duty. "How long until they reach the surface?" Veldar asked. 15 minutes, sir." Veldar hit the general alarm button. Throughout the base, soldiers from various species grabbed their weapons and ran toward their assigned positions. The granite folk moved slowly, but carried the heaviest weapons. The blade dancers were fast and deadly in close combat. The night stalkers would provide reconnaissance and sniping support. "What about the humans?" Mordak asked. Veldar had almost forgotten about them. "Keep them in the rear with the medical teams. They can help evacuate wounded." The transport ships landed hard on the surface, sending clouds of dust into the air. Through security cameras, Veldar watched as the doors opened and blood reapers poured out. They were massive creatures, each one standing over 4 meters tall with thick red skin covered in natural armor plates. Their arms ended in claws that could slice through metal, and their mouths were filled with rows of sharp teeth. "First wave is 300 hostiles," reported the sensor operator. "Second wave dropping now, sir." Veldar watched his forces take defensive positions around the colony buildings. The plan was simple: hold them off long enough for civilian evacuation ships to arrive. But as more blood reapers landed, he began to doubt they could manage even that. The first attack came like a hurricane. The blood reapers charged across the open ground, roaring battle cries that could be heard even through the reinforced walls. Veldar's forces opened fire, their energy weapons lighting up the battlefield. Several reapers fell, but the rest kept coming. "North wall is under heavy pressure," came a voice over the radio. "We need reinforcements." "South entrance is failing," called another. They broke through the first barrier. Veldar gripped his command console as he watched red dots representing his soldiers disappear one by one from the tactical display. The blood reapers were simply too strong and too many. "Sir," Mordak said quietly, "we should consider full retreat. Save who we can." Before Veldar could respond, a new voice came over the radio. It was calm and steady, speaking in basic galactic standard. "This is Sergeant Kim. We are moving to assist the North Wall." "Negative." Veldar snapped into his communicator. "Return to your assigned position immediately." "Sorry, sir, but we cannot do that," came the reply. "People need help." On the display screen, Veldar saw 3 small dots moving away from the safe zone toward the heaviest fighting. He wanted to order them back, but his attention was pulled away by another emergency report. For the next 20 minutes, Veldar fought to coordinate his crumbling defenses. His soldiers were brave and skilled, but they were being overwhelmed. Then something strange began to happen. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "I am getting odd reports from the battlefield." "What kind of reports?" "The blood reapers are retreating from Sector 7. Veldar stared at the tactical display. It was true. The red dots representing enemy forces were pulling back from one area, even though they had been winning their moments before. Confirmation from Sector 4. Another voice reported, "Enemy forces are withdrawing. Our forces are advancing." "That is impossible," Veldar muttered. "What changed?" Through the security cameras, he watched the battlefield trying to understand what was happening. Then he saw them. The 3 humans were moving between the defensive positions, but they were not running or hiding. They were fighting. Private Kong Ho Jin was somehow behind enemy lines, using a broken piece of mining equipment like a weapon. Private Lee Min-soo had turned a damaged vehicle into an explosive trap that had taken out an entire squad of Reapers. And Sergeant Kim was doing something that made Veldar's blood freeze. She was talking to a Blood Reaper warrior. Not fighting it, talking to it. The massive creature stood perfectly still, listening to whatever she was saying. Then, incredibly, it stepped backward. Other Reapers nearby began to hesitate, looking confused. "What is she doing?" Mordak whispered. Veldar zoomed in the camera, but he could not hear the conversation. He could only see Kim standing calmly in front of a creature that could tear her apart with one swipe of its claws. She was pointing at something and speaking in a steady voice. Suddenly, the Blood Reaper turned and ran. Not retreated. Ran. Others followed. Within minutes, the entire attack force was withdrawing to their ships. The battle was over. Veldar sat in stunned silence as his remaining forces cheered over the radio. They had won, but he had no idea how. When the 3 humans returned to base, Veldar was waiting for them. "Sergeant Kim," he said slowly, "what exactly did you say to that warrior?" Kim looked tired, but her voice was still calm. "I explained the situation to him, sir." "What situation?" "That if they continued attacking, we would have to stop being polite." 3 weeks after the mining colony incident, Veldar sat in his office staring at reports that made no sense. Every commander in the sector was requesting human soldiers for their units. The demand had become so high that the High Command had to create a waiting list. Captain Mordak entered carrying another stack of mission reports. "Sir, you need to see these." Veldar took the files and began reading. The first report was from Commander Zalketh of the Orbital Defense Station. A Blood Reaper raiding party had attacked his facility expecting an easy target. Instead, they found Lieutenant Park So-young and her squad of 12 humans. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the surviving raiders sent a message to their home fleet warning them to avoid that sector entirely. 6 hours? Veldar muttered. "The last time Blood Reapers attacked that station, it took us 3 days to drive them off." The second report was even more strange. Captain Yun Jae-hoon had been assigned to a diplomatic mission on the neutral world of Kepler Prime. A terrorist group had taken hostages demanding the release of Blood Reaper prisoners. Instead of calling for backup or negotiating, Yin had walked into the building alone and unarmed. 2 hours later, he walked out with all the hostages safe. The terrorists had not only surrendered, but had also provided information about other planned attacks. How did he do it? Veldar asked. Mordak shook his head. The report just says he talked to them. The terrorists refused to explain what he said. That changed their minds. Veldar continued reading. Major Jean Woo-suk had ended a month-long siege in 8 hours. Corporal Lee Min-soo had somehow convinced an entire pirate fleet to change sides and join the alliance. Sergeant Oh-soo Jin had walked into a Blood Reaper prison camp and walked out with 50 rescued prisoners, leaving the guards too confused to stop her. Every single report followed the same pattern. Humans would arrive at what seemed like an impossible situation. They would do something that made no sense according to standard military tactics. The enemy would retreat, surrender, or simply stop fighting. "Sir," Mordak said carefully, "I have been researching human military history." Veldar looked up from the reports. "What did you find?" "They have been fighting wars on their home planet for over 10,000 years. Continuous warfare, sir. They have never had a period longer than a few years without some major conflict happening somewhere on their world." "That cannot be right," Veldar said. "Most species fight until they either destroy themselves or learn to live in peace." "How did they survive?" "They adapted, sir. Every time they developed a new weapon, they also developed defenses against it. Every time they created a new strategy, they also figured out how to counter it. They have been locked in an arms race with themselves for their entire recorded history." Veldar set down the reports and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds. Below, he could see mixed species units running combat exercises. The aliens moved in predictable patterns, following established tactics that had worked for thousands of years. But when humans joined the exercises, everything changed. He watched as Private Kong, Ho Jin, did something impossible. During a simulated building assault, he had somehow convinced the defending Granite folk to surrender without firing a shot. The exercise referees were arguing about whether this counted as cheating. "There is something else, sir," Mordak continued. "I access their cultural database. Humans do not just study warfare as a military necessity. They study it as entertainment. They have thousands of books, movies, and games about different types of combat and strategy. Children on their world play war games for fun. You mean they enjoy fighting? No, sir, that is not quite right. They enjoy solving the puzzle of fighting. They treat every battle like a problem that needs a creative solution." Veldar turned away from the window. "Show me their planet's history files." The holographic display activated, showing Earth floating in space. It looked peaceful enough, covered in blue oceans and white clouds. But as Mordak began the presentation, Veldar realized he was looking at one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun. Asteroid impacts that wiped out entire species. Predators with claws, fangs, and poison. Diseases that killed millions. Natural disasters that destroyed entire civilizations. Their planet has been trying to kill them for millions of years, Mordak explained. And they survive by becoming better at survival than anything else on their world. "But they look so fragile," Veldar protested. "That is exactly why they are so dangerous, sir. Every other species in the galaxy developed obvious advantages. We grew armor and claws. Others became stronger or faster or developed energy weapons. But humans had none of those advantages, so they had to become smarter." Veldar studied the data scrolling across the display. Human wars involving millions of soldiers. Weapons that could destroy entire cities. Strategies so complex they required teams of specialists to understand them. "Sir," Mordak said quietly, "I think we have made a mistake. We assume that because humans are physically weak, they are not dangerous. But looking at this data, I believe they may be the most dangerous species we have ever encountered." "Why?" "Because they do not fight like warriors, sir. They fight like hunters. And we never saw them coming. The attack on Blood Reaper Prime was supposed to be the final battle of the war." Veldar stood on the bridge of the command ship, watching hundreds of Allied vessels prepare for the assault. This was the enemy's home world, defended by their strongest warriors and most advanced weapons. Estimated casualties? Veldar asked his tactical officer. 60% losses minimum, sir. Possibly higher. The Blood Reapers have had 3 years to prepare their defenses. Veldar nodded grimly. It would be a costly victory, but it had to be done. The Blood Reapers would never stop attacking innocent worlds unless their military power was completely broken. Major Jean Wusuk approached the command station. The human looked calm as always, studying the tactical displays with quiet interest. Over the past months, he had been promoted 3 times after solving problems that had puzzled alien commanders for years. "Major, your assessment of the situation?" Veldar asked. Jean looked at the planet, rotating slowly on the main screen. Red storms swirled across its surface, and massive defense platforms orbited like deadly moons. "Difficult target, sir, but manageable." "Manageable?" Captain Mordak laughed bitterly. "Major, there are 50 million Blood Reapers down there, all of them warriors. Their cities are built like fortresses. They have weapons that can destroy entire fleets." "Yes, sir," Jean agreed, "but they are also predictable." Before anyone could ask what he meant, the first wave of Allied ships moved toward the planet. The Blood Reapers responded exactly as expected, launching massive flights of attack craft and firing their orbital weapons. The battle began with tremendous explosions lighting up space. Veldar watched the tactical display as red and blue dots danced across the screen, each one representing ships and the lives of their crews. The Allies were holding their own, but barely. The Blood Reaper defenses were even stronger than intelligence had predicted. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we are receiving a transmission from the human ships." "Put it through." Captain Kim Dlee's voice filled the bridge. Request permission to begin Phase 2 operations. Veldar frowned. What Phase 2? There's only one battle plan. Negative, sir, Kim replied calmly. We submitted our own operational plan 3 days ago. Did you not receive it? Mordak quickly checked his files. Sir, there's a document here from a human command staff. It was filed under supplementary materials. What does it say? Mordak's four eyes widened as he read. Sir, they want to land ground forces on the planet's surface. That is impossible. Veldar snapped. The planetary defenses would destroy any landing craft before they reached the atmosphere. Actually, sir, Jean said quietly, we are not using landing craft. Before Veldar could ask for clarification, he saw something impossible on the display screen. Small human ships were diving straight toward the planet, but they were not following normal attack patterns. Instead of trying to avoid the defensive fire, they were flying directly into it. What are they doing? Veldar shouted. Using the enemy fire as cover. Jean explained. Each explosion creates sensor shadows and electromagnetic interference. By timing their approach correctly, they can slip through gaps in the defense grid. One by one, the human ships disappeared into the planet's atmosphere. Veldar waited for confirmation that they had been destroyed, but instead, he began receiving landing confirmations. First wave successful, came Kim's voice. Beginning urban operations. Urban operations? Veldar demanded. Major, what exactly are your people doing down there? Instead of answering, Jean pointed to a secondary display showing surface activity. Watch the power grid, sir. Veldar saw the lights of Blood Reaper cities flickering and going dark one by one. But this was not random destruction. The pattern was too organized, too precise. They are not just attacking power stations, Mordak observed. They are targeting specific nodes to create cascading failures. Communication networks are going down as well, reported the sensor officer. The Blood Reapers are losing coordination between their defense sectors. For the next 6 hours, Veldar watched something he had never seen before. The humans were not just fighting the Blood Reapers. They were systematically dismantling their entire civilization. Supply lines were cut with surgical precision. Command centers were isolated from their forces. Transport networks were disrupted in ways that created maximum confusion. Most disturbing of all, the humans seemed to know exactly which targets would cause the most psychological damage. Sir, the communications officer announced, we are receiving a transmission from the Blood Reaper High Command. They want to surrender? Veldar asked hopefully. No, sir. They are asking what the humans want. Veldar turned to Jean. What do you want? Unconditional surrender and immediate cessation of all military operations against Alliance worlds. Jean replied without hesitation. And if they refuse? Jin's expression did not change, but something cold flickered in his dark eyes. Then we continue to the next phase, which is, we stop being polite, sir. The transmission from the planet's surface crackled with static. When the Blood Reaper commander spoke, his voice was shaking. We accept your terms. Please call off your warriors. Confirm surrender, Jean announced. All human forces are standing down. Veldar stared at the display screen showing a planet that had been completely conquered in less than 8 hours. 50 million of the galaxy's most feared warriors had surrendered to a few thousand humans. Major, he said slowly, what would have happened if they had refused to surrender? Jean looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Sir, that was never really an option. They just needed time to understand the situation. The surrender ceremony took place aboard the massive Alliance flagship 3 days after Blood Reaper Prime had fallen. Veldar stood in the main conference hall, watching history being made. For the first time in galactic records, the Blood Reapers were formally surrendering to another species. The Blood Reaper war chief was enormous even by his species standards. Standing nearly 5 meters tall with scarred red skin and battle-worn armor, he had led campaigns that destroyed entire star systems. Now he knelt on the polished floor before a small human female who barely reached his shoulder. Captain Kim Dalley wore the same standard uniform she had always worn, but now it carried the insignia of a full colonel. She had been promoted 4 times in the past week as news of the human victories spread throughout Alliance space. Her voice was calm and professional as she read the surrender terms. All Blood Reaper military forces will withdraw to designated home system boundaries. All captured prisoners and civilian hostages will be released within 30 days. All weapons of planetary destruction will be turned over to Alliance inspection teams. The war chief's massive head nodded slowly. "We accept these terms," he rumbled in heavily accented Galactic Standard. Veldar noticed something he had never seen before. The war chief's hands were shaking slightly. This was a creature who had faced armies without fear, but now he seemed nervous in the presence of one small human. After the formal ceremony ended, Veldar found himself walking through the ship's corridors with Major Jean Wusuk. Other crew members stepped aside as they passed, and Veldar realized they were moving out of Jin's way, not his own. "Major," Veldar said carefully, "the other species are afraid of humans now." Jean looked surprised. "Afraid? Why would they be afraid? We are allies, because of what you did on Blood Reaper Prime. None of us understand how you accomplished it so quickly. We just solved the problem, sir. That is what soldiers do." They passed a group of granite folk, warriors, in the hallway. These were some of the toughest fighters in the galaxy, creatures who could crush metal with their bare hands. But they pressed themselves against the wall as Jean walked by, avoiding eye contact. "Major," Veldar continued, "other commanders are requesting detailed reports on human combat methods. They want to understand your tactics." "Our tactics are not complicated," Jean replied. "We study the enemy, find their weaknesses, and exploit them efficiently." "But how did you know where to strike?" "The Blood Reapers have been planning their defenses for years." Jean stopped walking and turned to face Veldar. "Sir, with respect, that was exactly the problem. They spent years preparing for the war they expected to fight, but we did not give them that war." In the ship's recreation area, Veldar saw more evidence of how attitudes toward humans had changed. The other species sat in their usual groups, but now there was always an empty space around any humans present. Not unfriendly, but respectful distance. Corporal Lee Minsu sat alone at a table, calmly eating his meal while reading a tactical manual. Nearby, a group of blade dancers whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing in his direction. One of them had been present when Lee single-handedly captured an entire Blood Reaper supply depot using nothing but improvised explosives and psychological warfare. "Major," Veldar said quietly, "there are rumors spreading through the fleet." "What kind of rumors, sir?" "That humans are not really from Earth. That you are some kind of advanced warrior race that has been hiding your true nature." Jean actually smiled at this. "Sir, we are exactly what we appear to be. We are from Earth. We are relatively weak physically, and we have no special powers." "Then how do you explain what happened?" "Earth taught us to survive, sir. For millions of years, everything on our planet tried to kill us. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even other humans. We learned to adapt or die." They reached the observation deck, where large windows showed the stars beyond. Several other officers were present, but they maintained respectful distance from the human major. "The thing about humans," Jean continued, "is that we do not see problems as obstacles. We see them as puzzles to solve. The Blood Reapers were certainly dangerous, but they were also predictable. They followed patterns that made sense to them but were obvious to us." "What patterns?" "They always chose the most direct approach. They relied on fear and intimidation. They assumed their enemies would fight the same way they did. Once we understood this, the rest was just mathematics." Veldar looked out at the stars, thinking about everything that had happened. "Major, what will humans do now that the war is over?" "We will go home, sir, back to our families and our normal lives. And if there is another threat to the Alliance," Jin's expression became serious, "then we will deal with it, just like we dealt with this one." The simple certainty in his voice made Veldar's scales shiver. He realized that the galaxy had discovered something unprecedented. Humans were not conquerors or destroyers. They were problem solvers. And any species that became a problem for the Alliance would find itself facing creatures who treated galactic warfare like a mathematical equation to be balanced. Later that day, Veldar filed his final report to Alliance Command. His recommendation was simple and urgent: ensure that humanity remains our ally at all costs. Because a species that considers defeating the galaxy's most feared warriors to be just another day at work is not something anyone wants as an enemy. The humans, for their part, seemed genuinely puzzled by all the attention they were receiving. As Colonel Kim told him before leaving, "We were just protecting our friends. That is what friends do." That, Veldar thought, was exactly what made them so terrifying.